Good afternoon. My name is Tanya Schultz, and I'm the chair of the Council on the Status of Women here at the University of Iowa. Welcome to the 2020 Women's Leadership Initiative event. How appropriate that we're here celebrating women's leadership just 2 days before International Women's Day. This event is organized by the University of Iowa Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with collaboration from the Iowa Women's Leadership Network, the University of Iowa Women of Color Network, and the Council on the Status of Women. Before we get started, I wanted to let you all know the bathrooms are by the elevator. There are gender-inclusive bathrooms on the first floor, I've been told. And we are filming today's event, so if you need to leave the room, please use the entrance and exit that is by the food. Don't come this way and walk in front of the cameras, please. So the Women's Leadership Initiative, through this annual speaker event, aims to foster a community of support for the empowerment of women by women to pursue leadership roles at all levels of higher education across the state of Iowa. Each session features a talk by a woman leader in higher education on topics of impact for women's leadership in colleges and universities, followed by a dialogue. Our keynote speaker this year is Dr. Tanya Uden Holman. Tanya was appointed Associate Provost for Undergraduate Education and Dean of University College in June 2018. Prior to her appointment, she served as Associate Dean for Academic Affairs in the College of Public Health for 14 years. Tanya is a clinical professor in the Department of Health Management and Policy, and she earned her BA, MA, and PhD in sociology here at the University of Iowa. Tanya's activities at the university have included service on numerous collegiate and university committees. She served as chair of the UI Interprofessional Education Steering Committee initiative, which brings together representatives from all 5 health sciences colleges. Additionally, Tanya is involved in pipeline activities to increase the diversity of the emerging workforce. She has served as co-principal investigator for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation-funded Summer Health Professions Education Program, which seeks to strengthen the academic proficiency and career development of students underrepresented in health professions. Her extramural funding includes the Midwestern Public Health Training Center, funded by a grant from the Health Resources and Services Administration, which focuses on public health workforce development. In her role as Associate Provost for Undergraduate Education and Dean of University College, Tanya's portfolio includes the Academic Advising Center, Pomerantz Career Center, Office of the Registrar, Office of Assessment, Academic Support and Retention, I'm only halfway done, stay with me, first year programs, the Bachelor of Applied Sciences and Bachelor of Liberal Studies degree programs, the Honors Program, Distance and Online Education, and Army and Air Force ROTCs. In all of her activities, Dr. Uden Holman is committed to creating an environment where every student can be successful. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tanya Uden Holman.
Thank you so much. Oh, that was so sweet of you. Appreciate it. All right. Okay. Is the microphone working okay? Can you hear me way in the back? All right. So I am completely mic'd up on either side. So if if you're kind of like, really, what's going on there? It's because I'm mic'd. So if for some reason during the presentation the microphones start to not work, I hope you'll all let me know. So thank you, Hannah, so much for that very generous introduction. I really appreciate it. And I have the privilege and honor of working with Hannah in the Midwestern Public Health Training Center. So it was especially meaningful to me that you introduced me today. So thank you. So I am very honored and humbled to be here today. I have to confess that when I first received the email, I was like, are you sure you sent it to the right email account? Now, I know my name is different, so probably you did, but are you sure that you want me here today? And really thought about, okay. But then I thought about Dr. Denise Martinez's presentation here about crushing imposter syndrome. And I thought, okay, I bet I have imposter syndrome going on. And I'm just gonna take a step back and just do my best. So in the spirit of that, what I hope to chat with you all today, if we can get the slides to advance. Or not. There we go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my leadership journey and some of the things that have really kind of how I think about things and have been important to me, my takeaways in my journey. Defining leadership, have us all, and we're going to do a small group activity. So for those of you in the audience who are like, oh my gosh, I don't usually, interact with others that well, that would be my husband. You can think about that a little bit ahead of time and, things that define us as leaders. And then really this idea, and when I was asked what book, and I thought about the work of Brene Brown and really thought about her ideas about being vulnerable and how that fits into our leadership, especially as women, and then really finding the courage to be true to yourself. So those are some of the things that I want to talk a little bit about today. Now, one thing that I should have put on the slide, but I didn't, but really struck me today, was as a leader, the importance of being flexible. So I have to admit that in my job, that COVID-19 has become a thing that I know probably way more about than I ever thought I would. And so it has, especially in the last 48 hours, has become this really big thing. So just know that a chunk of my time has been spent on that. So I prepared and I have a PowerPoint, but but there were these things like other duties as assigned as associate provost that came into place. So I'm hoping you'll all be patient with me here today. So putting this presentation together was a really reflective experience for me. Now, I don't know about all of you in the room, but in my daily life, and that includes like professional and personal, I'm like fortunate to have time to eat lunch and maybe hit the restroom a couple times. And so, I don't necessarily take that much time to stop and think about where have I been and how did I get to where I am and who kind of had an impact on the way. So as I went through and just thought about how did I get to where I am, it was really a time of that reflection to think about people who made a difference. And so I would just, share that it was really interesting to take that time because we don't often have that time to stop and reflect. So, once again, the good news is that this is not a slide-heavy presentation. All right. Hey, Tom. All right, I'm going to try to see if the mouse works. There we go. I'm not afraid to try something else. So, as I talk about my journey, and you can probably see this from the slide, I grew up on a farm way in northwest Iowa, and so farming community. Went to a fairly small high school, although by Iowa standards, frankly, having a graduating class of 100 is pretty big, so not that small. And so I have to confess that, when I was growing up, I never thought, I want to be an academic administrator when I grow up someday, right? Let's be honest, who even knows what an academic administrator is? And so the only person I think who probably knows that, I have a 17-year-old who was filling out the Common application, and you have to put what kind of career you want. And there are things like, because he's really into social justice, so there's like lawyer, maybe college professor, and he's like, I want to choose college administrator or staff. And I'm like, are you really sure you want to do that? And he's like, no, I really do. And I'm like, I don't know about that. Anyway, but I did let him choose it. I did not go back and change his application. And it's true, he was 2 when I took my first administrative gig, so he actually probably really knows kind of what it means to be an administrator, and we'll see what happens a couple decades from now. But I never thought about that when I was growing up, right? Never thought, what could that be? All I knew was that I wanted to get out of northwest Iowa. It's a little bit more conservative than I wanted. And I wanted to go someplace bigger. I wanted to go someplace where I could be more anonymous, right? So University of Iowa, it's a good place to go. So I came down here, and when I first started, I majored in political science, and I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. Now, no offense to anybody from poli-sci or any lawyers in the room, but I figured out really fast, not for me. Just didn't do it for me at all. However, I took sociology courses, and the concept of like social justice, the inequities that we face, ideas in terms of looking at structures and the impact that it has, like power has on our structures, really resonated with me. I thought it was really interesting how people work together in groups. And I was like, all right, this is a much better fit. So changed majors and was a social major. And that actually really, that change in major impacted me both professionally and personally. Personally, when I was a senior undergrad, I met my husband in a graduate level theory course. I was in the honors in sociology, and that was a way that I could fulfill that. He was a first year grad student, so that's where we met. So we've been married, I think, almost 32 years, and have been together longer. And I'll talk more about that in a minute, because he's an important part, my family's an important part of how I can do what I do. And then professionally, to be honest, I like school, right? Hello, maybe some of you have been in the same gig. I liked school. Figured, job, I'll just keep going to school. So I got a really good offer and continued on in terms of getting my PhD in sociology. And my area of emphasis on my doctorate was job satisfaction and organizational commitment, so why people like their jobs or don't, why they decide to stay or not. And those things were really helpful, right? And I did some survey construction and data analysis along the way. So those things really helped as I think about how organizations work. Believe it or not, and I was just saying this to Bria a minute ago, the University of Iowa is a really big bureaucracy, right? Well, it's not huge, but we're a pretty decent sized bureaucracy. And if you think about it, all the things we talk about in organizations, like people working in silos. I don't know about all of you, maybe that never happens in your world. But we do once in a while have silos in my world. And so thinking about, okay, I know a bit about organizations, and how do we start then to think about bridging those silos, right? So that's one of the things, that's been helpful in my job. And okay, I finished my degree, and my husband was still in grad school. So I took a job on a grant, Institute for Quality Healthcare. How can we get hospitals to work together? And let me tell you, in the early 90s, that was like not a thing. Nowadays, that's a big thing, but not back then. And so I moved from main campus over to the health sciences side of the river, and I was in the West Lawn building, which does still exist, at least for a while. And back in the early 90s, it was an incredibly isolated place, right? And I promise I'm getting to a point. And one of the things that really hit me, I went from having a really supportive graduate student community that frankly included my husband too, right? And we did a lot of things together, and I had social support, and that was really great. I went from that to being over in West Lawn. There weren't very many people, and the faculty member I originally was working for was not the most outgoing person. My onboarding existed of, here's your office, there's a computer, stapler there, go for it. And I'm like, oh my God, because I'm a little bit more, believe it or not, a little bit more outgoing. So I'm like, looking for some social support here. Now the good news is that not long afterwards, I switched who I was working for most closely, and I worked for Doug Wakefield, who at that time, this is a long time ago before the College of Public Health existed, and actually Tom Bunn, who's here today, I worked with all those years ago. And so he came, and he was a much different supervisor. And he actually, this is my first takeaway, in terms of, as I think about people who've impacted my journey, he was really a mentor to me, okay? Now, I'll be honest, all those years ago, we didn't use the term mentor, at least not in my world, right? So it wasn't until much later in my journey that I actually was like, oh, that's what he was for me. And I think that what's interesting, especially at the time I was working, really, there weren't any women that worked on my project. So to me, the importance of men in terms of being allies and serving mentorship roles was really important. So Doug, during my journey, was really an important person in terms of helping in terms of professional development, giving me support, telling me when I didn't do things as well, and really helping me to grow into terms of a leader. Now, none of us are perfect, and he would be the first to say that he had quirks, and his wife, who is also an incredible female leader, would probably be the way first person to tell you he's not perfect. But anyway, I worked with her too, and she was great, Bonnie Wakefield. And so, really having someone who served in that mentor role, right? Because that's not always an easy thing. And one of the things that I'm really appreciative of, so as I went through my journey, The College of Public Health was formed in 1999, and then in 2004, the person who had been the associate dean for academics left and took another job. So I applied for the position and was chosen for it. And this was a place, I really felt like I was going out on a limb to some degree when I applied for the job, because I'm like, okay, I have some experience, but not a ton of experience, but we're gonna try this out. I'm really pretty good at making the trains run on time. I'm very operational. So I'm like, okay. And there were a couple of really interesting features there. And Doug played an important role in really turning this. So I was 10 years younger than the next oldest person on the leadership team, right? Who was also a woman. And I was more than 15 years younger than any of the men, okay? And they really hadn't had, the two of us, myself and my colleague, were the first two women who were on associate deans. And another thing, so that's, I'm way younger, right? And that has happened through my career, so that's not a huge thing. But the big thing is the person whose place I took had not been well liked among the department heads. Really wasn't. Had burned lots of bridges, was a person who was like, it's my way or the highway. That was his style, right? So I get there and the department heads all think that's gonna be me. And they don't necessarily treat me very well. And I'm thinking, well, hello. I'm used to being liked for the most part, and I'm pretty good at working with people, and here I have all these people who are in positions of authority, and they're like grumpy ass at me. Sorry. And so I'm like, what is this? And it was really helpful because Doug was one of the department heads, and he stepped in and said, you need to stop now. Now. She has the right to do this herself. Don't judge her by the person who was there in the past. You need to stop this now and give her a chance. And he had enough authority and respect among the other department heads that they at least were like, okay, or maybe they were afraid of him, I don't know. He probably would have been like this. And so he's like, give her a chance. And so they did. And so at least I had the opportunity to show them that I really am not a my way or the highway kind of person, it's really important to me to try to make connections and figure out how can we make things work. It's been a really important part of who I am. But I probably would not have had that opportunity, or it would have been much harder if he hadn't been able and willing to step in and say that. So for that, I'm really appreciative of that. And I guess that I would say, as you think about your worlds, right, and how you fit into things, sometimes we have to play that role. Sometimes we have to step in, right? And we might not think about it, but I would really encourage you to, because it can really make a huge difference. Now, some of you in the room might be saying, well, I'm really junior in my career. How can I be a mentor? But my guess is you might work with students, undergraduate or graduate students, and you have a chance to mentor them. And just everybody you interact with, how can you have that impact? So like I said, mentorship to me has made all the difference. And I think about, how can I pay that forward? And I really try to think about how can I be there and present for people, and to be a mentor, and to think about others who might be more junior, and how can I help make connections for them? Because I think that's really important. It's a super important thing to me. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to say about that. Anyway, another mentor that I had that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention is Sue Curry, who was the former dean of the College of Public Health and the interim vice president and provost. Huge, huge mentor and role model for me in so many ways. Sue really helped show me that idea of you can be true to yourself and be a leader. I mean, she had a great sense of humor. She could be self-deprecating at times. She was not afraid to just be herself. She also was pretty good about work-life balance, I would say, and that helped me reflect on that. And so as a female in a leadership position, she really was someone that I looked up to and thought about, okay, what are some of the, I would look at how she worked with committees and groups, and I thought, what are my takeaways that I can learn from that? And so she was somebody that I really consider that, who encouraged me and really helped, me grow and to take on additional responsibilities. It's because of her that I really, she was like, I think you should head up this interprofessional education steering committee. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not a healthcare professional. But I was like, okay, I will give this a try. And so I did. So like I said, she's another person who's been really important on my journey. And I think it's important to take time out and to reflect on those individuals. So anyway, mentorship I think is critically important. The next takeaway for me on my journey, let's see if this works. Always be open and willing to learn new things. To me, that's been really important. I really consider my life to be a journey of learning, right? And I love that, and I don't ever want to stop. And you have to be willing to step outside your comfort zone sometimes, right? Because, you know, my discipline background is sociology, but most of the work I've done is not in that discipline. I moved across the river and started to do work in healthcare. And as I just mentioned, I'm not a healthcare provider, nor do I play one on TV. And so here I am, right? And I'm with all of these healthcare providers. So I had an opportunity to do quality, not long after I started with IQH, I had the chance to go through quality improvement training and facilitator training. And it was a great experience, although super scary, because you have physicians and, you know, department administrators from the hospital and everything. And then there's me, you know, hi, PhD in sociology, go me. And so, you know, I had to be really open and a bit vulnerable to own what I didn't know, right? And that's okay. But I learned so much. And probably the biggest things I learned from facilitator training, conflict management, communication, and working with teams, right? And I use those things every day, and they're really important. So, you know, if I hadn't been open to that and said, sure, I'll give this a try, I wouldn't have really had that skill set expanded and learned so much. And I had to be willing. I did quality improvement training in hospitals for a long time. And it's really where I first started to learn, you just got to own it, right? So when I would go into the hospital, I'd be the first person to say, you know what? I'm not a healthcare provider. You're going to be the experts here. So I want to learn from you. I want to learn what you know so that we can work together to figure out, how do we make your processes work better? How can you come together as a team and work? And I found that by acknowledging that and owning that and being really open about it, people were okay with it. They didn't judge me. They were like, okay. And sometimes having somebody with not a healthcare background in that setting, I could sometimes be more objective because I didn't, you know, I didn't have that. Didn't matter to me. Physician, nurse, whatever, just want to work together. So that's been important to me. The other area where I have benefited so much, when I was in the College of Public Health, I had the opportunity and privilege, I really considered it, to chair our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And as part of that work, really got to participate in a lot of different workshops and activities, and I learned so much. And I was able to use that information both personally and professionally. So that concept of cultural humility, I used to in some of my classes talk about cultural competence, but it never quite felt right, because to me competence is you get at a point where you could be like, checkbox, competent. And so I was always like, eh. And then I learned about cultural humility, and I'm like, yes, this is what I've been looking for. It's a journey, right? And so I got to use that personally, but then also in my courses that I taught. And it's just really been, it's really made, it just, you know, I consider that to have been transformative learning. And I'm appreciative of the fact that I had that chance and that I'm able, I like to think, to use that knowledge gained and to keep learning. So like I said, being willing and open to learning new things is really huge for me. Other things, work-life balance. Now, I know that there are people in the room who know me fairly well, and you're probably rolling your eyes really big time right now. I see you over there, Angie and Kathy, going like, yeah, work-life balance, like she knows how to do that. However, I do try, right? And I'm really fortunate because I have a great support system at home. Fortunately, my husband is really good, you know, laundry, dishes, etc. Doesn't faze him at all. I like to think that was some influence of his mom, who was a really strong woman. And so it's not a problem for him at all. He really was the primary caregiver for our younger son especially. And so having a supportive family unit who really came together makes it easier for me to try to find that work-life balance. I'm not afraid to put my kids to work. My younger one especially knows all about accreditation and other things over the years. Spring break, Reese is there searching websites for competencies. He's doing literature searches. So, work is a family sport, or family affair. So anyway, that's been helpful to me, but I do try to take time for family. It's really important. And I also, when I think about work-life balance, the friendships that I have at work is not just work for me, but that's where I have personal relationships as well. And that's really critical. So to me, that comes into play. I'm still a work in progress, but that's okay. We all are. This is not going to be a surprise to you, but for me, relationships are really key. It's so important to have and make relationships. And I try to be really respectful because, you really have to get to know the people you work with. So that's been a cool opportunity for me because when I was in public health, I'd been there forever and, we'd have new people in, but for the most part, I kind of knew what to expect and everything. Now, I did have chance when I started working with the Interprofessional Education Steering Committee, that was a whole new thing to learn about and grow from. But then I came across the river. Now, a lot of people, I knew and everything, but I had a lot more direct reports that I hadn't worked with before. So it's a chance to get to know people. Now, the good news is because of the fact that I'm married to somebody who's super introverted, like my rule of thumb is, what would John do about this? And if I think, oh my God, he would really not like this, then I try to, moderate it. And so, but getting to know the people that I work with, sharing a bit about me and kind of what my priorities are. And then over time, learning more about them and how we have those commonalities and what's important for them. And that's important. And I have to tell you that in my role currently, I am so grateful for the relationships that I have across campus. I think I mentioned earlier that we're working on COVID-19 right now. And it's so helpful for me to be able to, I know Angie Reams is here someplace, but to be able to reach out to people and talk about, what's going on, what's important to you, talking with different units, reaching out, where's Angie? And that's really critical. In everything I do, those relationships. And I would be lost if I wasn't able to form those relationships. I can't imagine just working on my own in a little cubicle or at my house because I need that relationships, and it's really how we form them. And then as part of that, really that trust building that happens, and how do we build trust in our relationships and really working with one another? How do we try to work together to figure out something that works for both of us? Because to be honest, sometimes we have to make hard decisions, right? But it's still really important. And I think sometimes with leadership, there's this idea, and I like to think it's more going away, that well, you can't have relationships with the people you supervise because then when things get tough, well, what are you going to do about it? And I'd be like, well, I would be miserable and I don't want to be that way. But I actually like to think when you build relationships and more challenging situations come up, we can have conversations, right? Because we know it's not about us as persons. Okay, that was probably grammatically incorrect, but I'm sorry. Anyway, it's not about us as a person, but it's about the situation in which we find ourselves. And how do we work together to figure out, is there a common ground we can reach, and how do we do that? So that to me is super important and has really been critical to me. Other things that I think about. Treat everyone with respect. This is a big one for me. One of the things that is just like a trigger for me is people who treat people up the food chain or at their level with respect, but they don't treat people who we would consider lower down with respect. It's a huge issue for me. It's like one thing if you're going to treat me disrespectfully, I'm not thrilled about that, but whatevs. But if you treat other people, be it, an assistant or the stocking person in the, like grocery clerk, stocker, or whomever disrespectfully, I have no time for that, right? Not okay. And so that's the point where I sometimes will intervene. If somebody's being disrespectful to somebody who, my staff member or elsewhere, I'm gonna say something to somebody because that's not okay. So this has been really important to me, and I just think It's a tenet of how I believe this in my heart. And the same goes with students, right? I think it's truly, as I think about the work that I've done with students, having that respectful relationship is super important. Actively listen to others. I'm not perfect at this. I'm going to own. Sometimes because of the way my brain works, I might be thinking of other things, but I try really hard to be present and to really reflect on what people are saying. Now, I think sometimes people think they're good listeners, but they maybe really aren't. And I think taking that time to think about, am I really engaging here? How am I, understanding and working with folks? But to really take the time to be present and to listen has been critical for me. And then finally, keep your sense of humor. Those of you who know me know that I like to try to keep a sense of humor. Now, it's possible that Sarah once in a while wishes that I wouldn't laugh so loudly in my office, but maybe not. So I do. I think laughter is an important part of what we do. And sometimes if we didn't laugh, we'd probably end up crying or something. So, keeping your sense of humor and figuring out, okay, how are we going to get through this is important. So that's something that I always think about. So anyway, not to bore you, but these are things that I've reflected on as I think about my journey and the opportunities I have had, and I've been really fortunate. Okay, so defining leadership. What I'd like to do is, for a change of pace, you'll notice that there are index cards on your table and some pencils. So what I'd like you to do at your table, if you've not introduced yourselves already, please do so. And then I would love it if you would take a few minutes and just to yourself, jot down on the index card or a piece of paper if you have one. This is not graded and you don't have to turn it in. So for those of you in the room who are like, oh my God, I'm going to be graded on this, there is not a test. And I want you to reflect on what are some things that you consider to be essential in a leader, all right? So just take a few minutes. Why don't you take 3 minutes or so and just jot down a few ideas. And then in 3 to 5 minutes, start to talk about the ideas with others at your table, including why those qualities are important. Does that make sense to everybody? So just really, you all, to be honest, there's so many of you in your room that I look towards for leadership. You are leaders, and so would love to hear some of the things that you have to say too. So at your table, do some work, and then at the end, I want you to identify your top essential qualities of a leader at your table, your top 5. Does that make sense to everybody? Everybody cool? All right, I'm gonna turn off my mic. Go for it. Go forth and write ideas.
No, I was going to question him enough.
Oh, okay.
I think we're unstable.
Okay, Margaret, I have to tell you, although I didn't mention it, Catherine was probably one of my mentors.
Wait, say it again?
Catherine.
Yes. And I enjoyed your talk. I know we're going to get more.
If you have your top 5 written down at your table, if you got to that point, and if you didn't, that's absolutely cool. But if anybody is interested in leaving their cards, we could pick them up and even share what people came up with, since we probably won't have time to share across the room since there's so many of us today. But I really appreciate everybody's active engagement and participation. I think we have so much to learn from one another. And so I think it's kind of cool when we give ourselves the space to do that, because we sometimes don't. So I hope that you enjoyed the conversations at your table, and I look forward to seeing some of the things that you jotted down and learning from all of you. So there are many, many lists out there. Of course, that's the wrong one. In terms of qualities of a leader, I just happened to pull some from the Center for Creative Leadership. This is by no means like a perfect list or an exhaustive list, but just some things. Obviously, integrity and honesty are really important, being ethical in what we do. I think, to me, that's just kind of a pillar. The second one, once again, people who know me, ability to delegate. I think this is super important, and I completely confess that this is something I really had to learn, especially as I moved to Jessup Hall into my current role. The College of Public Health is pretty small. It's a fairly small college, relatively speaking. And I did a lot of different things there. So, if we had a movie for Black History Month, I was there with the popcorn and, with Reese, of course, my 17-year-old, putting out the popcorn, taking out the garbage, because we were small, and that's what you did, student names to be looked up in Maui, I'm there. So when I moved to Jessup Hall, I really had to think carefully about this delegation thing. And part of the reason that I'm able to do that now is because, A, there are wonderful people that I work with that I'm very comfortable delegating to, and B, by building those relationships, right? I know I've built trust, and I believe, I know that they're going to do a great job. So that's one I'm still working on, but I'm doing a better job, I think. Communication is obviously critical. And really getting, we could spend a whole session together on communication styles and how people have different communication styles, but really thinking about that when you work with other people and thinking about what their communication style is. Sometimes we're maybe more passive communicators, sometimes people are really loud talkers and things, but figuring out your communication style and that of others can really help you as you navigate that. Once again, sense of humor. Confidence. Now this one I go back and forth on, right? So I think because I'm a female raised in the Midwest, it's like you don't ever want to make too much of yourself. You need to be modest because if you're full of yourself, if you're too overconfident, then what will happen? So it's kind of like, how do I strike a balance there? And for myself, confidence means acknowledging the work that I can do and what I have to contribute, right? But still not being that overconfident. I'm not sure that I personally could be I could perhaps be overconfident sometimes. Probably not just because of my personality, but how do we find that balance there, right? Commitment. I am all in, and I believe firmly in being committed to what I do. In my current job, that commitment has to do with primarily, looking at supporting commitment to student success. But I really believe in being wholehearted about what we do and making a genuine commitment. Positive attitude, I think, is important. Do I have days where I get grumpy? You can ask some of my coworkers. There are days when I'm maybe a little grumpy. Or do I sometimes have to go home and decompress? But, I try to be positive whenever possible. I think that's really important. Creativity, and I think creativity comes in lots of forms. I'll be honest, I'm probably a little more operational than creative, but I try to think creatively when it comes to how can we make things work? How can we figure out a way that we can take what you're looking for and this, and how do we bring those together? So that's where, to me, creativity comes into play. Ability to inspire. I like to think that, by building that trust and caring about people, true caring, that to me is a way that I hope that I'm able to inspire and caring. And then intuition. Now this one sometimes I'm like, okay, how does this work? And I think sometimes women might be afraid. It's like, can I use my intuition, or does that become too labeling that I'm, it's a female thing? But I think it's important to listen to your gut, right? And what it's telling you, because that can be really, really important. So those are some things that I've thought about. Like I said, we could spend a very long time talking about all of the ideas that you had. And so, like I said, just a few things to think about. So, how does being vulnerable fit with this concept of being a leader? And I found this really interesting and striking, especially as I think about it from being a woman. And sometimes we're told, don't show any vulnerability. You just can't do that, because then people will doubt you and wonder, do you know what you're doing? And yet when I look at this, Brené Brown's definition of vulnerability, and really the emotion that we experience during times of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. If you think about the times when you've shown courage, or that it's taken courage to do the job you're doing, those are times when we have to make ourselves vulnerable, right? I think it's really hard sometimes to show, can you be courageous without being vulnerable? Maybe, but I think that's something to think about. And I think it's okay to be vulnerable. I was really struck with her discussion of the 6 myths of vulnerability. And this is from her most recent book, Dare to Lead. In her previous book, The Daring Greatly, there were 4, and she upped it to 6 in this one. And, the thought that vulnerability is weakness, and it really isn't. And so that's why I think we have to turn that lens and be willing to make ourselves vulnerable sometimes. Because it's not weakness, and sometimes it can be a real strength, and to think about that and how we do that. This idea of 2 and 3 to me are kind of linked, that I don't do vulnerability, I don't let people see my, underbelly, whatever you want to call it. But sometimes we need to, right? I think sometimes to build relationships, to show trust, those are things we have to do. I can go it alone. Well, obviously, that myth, I don't usually, I know I can't go it alone. I need people. But sometimes people really feel like I have to do this myself for whatever reason, okay? But, no. This one I love. You can engineer the uncertainty and discomfort out of vulnerability. I know that Brene Brown talks about working with tech people and engineers, and they really want to be able to engineer the heck out of vulnerability. And it's like, you really can't. It's still there. Even underlying, it's there. Trust becomes before vulnerability. I think this is a really interesting one, right? This idea that, well, I have to trust you before I can feel, I can be vulnerable with you. And to me, I'm like, and I agree with what she said, not necessarily. Sometimes we have to show of ourselves in order to take that first step in building trust. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And how do we do that? How do we help show, Let me tell you a little bit about my journey, and then you can be like, okay, I wouldn't have known that about her, but what can I learn from that? And then vulnerability is disclosure, and I think this is a really good point. To be vulnerable does not mean that you have to blurt out your entire life and TMI and everything. It doesn't. So for those of you in the room who are perhaps, a little bit more introverted or a little, that's okay. Really, you have to, as some of my staff say, you do you, right? So you have to figure out what works for you, and that is all okay. So finding that balance of where do I want to be? And that's an okay thing. There's nothing wrong with that. One size doesn't fit all. So you have to figure out what makes the most sense for you. So when I think about kind of pulling everything together, and the things that are important to me, it is important to me. I reflect on how can I think about how vulnerability informs who I am and how I lead and how I work with others. That's a real tenet for me. Authenticity. I believe that's really important too. And that can be hard, right? Because it's too hard for me to have to live a double life, right? Like how I act over here versus how I act there. So to me, you can get what you get, right? For better or worse. But being able to be my authentic self is important. And it's also really important to me to work with others so that they can be their authentic self too. When I think about the work that we do with students, our staff, our LGBTQ work, many, many different activities that we do, how do we help people live their authentic lives so that they can find their happiness and really contribute and to find themselves? So that to me is a real important tenet, finding that in myself and helping others. One size doesn't fit all, which I've probably shared multiple times. When I first started out working professionally, of course, hello, hospital world. So, there's kind of a uniform for people who work in hospitals, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. MHA program is a great example of that, But I am never going to be a person who works it doesn't, a suit and stuff is just not quite my thing, and that's okay. And over time, you know what? I'm okay with who I am. I'm okay that I sometimes wear fairly bold jackets and things, and there's nothing wrong with that. And so you got to be you and figure out what works well for you and who you are, and it's okay. And that really goes with, you don't have to be perfect. We often hear, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good or the good enough. I truly believe you got to start somewhere, right? And do the best you can. And once we own that we're going to make mistakes and be human, it's okay. I don't have to be perfect. Now, I do have perfectionistic tendencies that I sometimes have to fight against, but it's okay. I have good colleagues who help me keep me on the honest path there. And then stay true to your core values. Really take time, and this is hard, right? Sometimes to find that space, but really figure out what's important to you. What are those core values? Your non-negotiables. Like, these are things that are really important to how I want to operate in my work life, in my personal life. And once you figure those out, those will really help guide you. At least that's what I have found. So anyway, those are my thoughts. So one final thought. A leader is anyone who holds her or himself accountable for finding potential in people and processes. The term leader has nothing to do with position, status, or number of direct reports. And I believe that's really true. So have the courage to be true to yourself, because you are all leaders. Thank you so much for your time and attention today. It's been a privilege to be here. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that. So every year we have our speaker go ahead and choose a book that they would like to raffle off. And I should say my name too. My name is Simone Fernandez. I am part of the Women of Color Network with Jessica Padilla, who's over there. Hi, Jess. And so, of course, Dr. Uden Holman has chosen Brené Brown for her book. So will you do the honors of choosing?
It would be my pleasure.
Oh, lovely, okay.
Lynn, super white. Thank you. It's nice. Oh, she wants to. Oh, they want to do a picture. So they're going to think that I rigged it, Lynn.
Thank you for your talk.
Kristen Lang. Hey, Kristen. There you go. Taking a picture. Yes, we are.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to choose. So I'm choosing too many names of people I know. So Tom, you're out. So I love you dearly, but everyone's going to think I rigged it. Laura's in. Thank you. I promised to buy you the book for Christmas, Tom. So Tom Vaughn is a faculty member in health management and policy, and we have known each other for very long, probably close to 25 years, I think. So let's go with that one. Is it one?
Oh, I switched over.
Did you switch? Okay.
See, that one's very folded.
Okay. Amy Oberfell. Who's not here? Okay, Amy's not here, so we're going to choose another. What? Okay. Nadine Petty. All sorts of people in here. Thanks for being here, Nadine. Oh, no worries.
One last one.
Okay.
Switch it up again.
Oh, and I think Betsy Kern, did she leave? I think so. Okay. We'll just decide if you have to be here in order to win. How's that? Anita Corey. There you go, Anita.
Thank you. She's one of my favorites.
Good.
Am I doing this right?
Cool.
Thanks.
so
Thank
much
you.
for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am honored to be invited to close us out this afternoon. My name is Heather Walensky, and I work in the University of Iowa Center for Advancement. I was invited to be a part of today because one of the new initiatives in our office is a new Iowa Women's Leadership Network comprised of volunteers and alumni who are going to help us think about how we can engage women alumni, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Latin, alumnae, in supporting the mission and goals of the university, and how can we mobilize women alumni with this great institution that we have. So we're thrilled that they could be here to be a part of Dr. Tanya Uden Holman's presentation today. I want to make sure that I do a good shout out to the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for doing all of the details around our experience today and bringing us all together. So please join me in thanking them. And there's a couple of things that I want everyone to take away from this experience today. One is that as you are exiting, you're going to be handed a feedback survey, because who would we be at the University of Iowa if we weren't diligent assessors of everything that we do? So we're going to be handing out that feedback survey, and the event coordinators are really looking forward to your leader level feedback. So be courageous in telling us how we can continue to improve and enhance the program that you experienced today. And then the second thing that I want you to think about as you exit today is also all of the great things that Dr. Uden Holman shared, and how we are all brought together for this experience because of International Women's Day, and how we can be courageous leaders of women all around the world, and not just here at the University of Iowa. I'm inspired by Dr. Uden Holman's remarks, and I'm inspired by the strength of the women that I see in this room, and I look forward to seeing what all we will accomplish together here at the university as we move forward. So thank you, Dr. Uden Holman, for being here. Thank you for all coming. Thank you, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Division, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Oh, he wants me to present it. Oh, okay. Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
Can I